WFSB Plus, the latest on the Michell Troconis trial, live analysis as we are in the middle of the 23rd day of this trial, just more than 3 weeks. It was certainly a short week. They had Monday off for the state holiday and then Tuesday off for the snowstorm here in Connecticut. And you remember that Troconis, of course, is one of two people facing charges in connection with the disappearance and murder of New Canaan mother Jennifer Farber-Dulos. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kara Sundlun, and joining me right now is criminal defense attorney Walter Hussey. Again, well known for your work in the world of criminal defense and trying murder cases like this, but to be clear, not working at all on the Troconis case. So all of this is your opinions and no secret information that you have on this case.
I have no secret information.
Yeah, but we love having you because, you know, I think as we watch this as lay people, it does get confusing. And this is a case that's captivated the nation ever since Jennifer vanished back in May of 2019, right in the midst of a bitter divorce and custody battle from her estranged husband, Fotis Dulos. Michell Troconis was the girlfriend of that husband. And then, of course, Fotis Dulos died by suicide back in January of 2020. We still have to see what happens to Kent Mawhinney. He is another person charged with conspiracy to commit murder and also someone who we expect to hear from in this case. We have not seen him take the stand yet, but we want to begin with what's been happening today. There has been some breaking news this morning where I was wondering, this is a case where it seems like, first of all, a lot of people getting in trouble for breaking rules. Is this normal in a criminal case, or you're seeing more rule breaking with some of the folks in this case?
Typically, no. It seems like there's more problems in this case than a typical case. I mean, I've seen cases that really get out of hand, but generally speaking, it's smooth.
Okay, so what happened today is, we just reported this on Eyewitness News at noon, is apparently Michell Troconis was looking at her computer and perhaps looking at a sealed custody document, and that maybe her mother was telling her, put that down, because the state was about to talk about that, and the judge saying, I'm not going to be a hall monitor, but no more computers for anyone in this except for the attorneys.
Yeah, well, there's a couple ways to look at it. I think what I at least inferred from what I read was there was a sealed document based on, I think, the custody fight over the kids. I could be wrong, but anyway, a judge in a different arena said that these documents need to be sealed. And for some reason, Troconis had it on her computer or laptop, whatever she was using in the courtroom, and I think the font was, at least what I read, that font was rather large so people in the audience could read it, right? And I think her mom was saying put that down because she heard that the state was going to make a stink about it, which they should, okay? And so I think that's really what it was about. So the state wanted to have her held in contempt, and I think the judge said, let's deal with that at another time, because I think it's really important for the judge to be impartial. In other words, a judge doesn't want to favor the state, doesn't want to favor the defendant, and certainly doesn't want to discipline or penalize the defendant in the middle of a trial, because that's a bad look, and it could taint the case, one way or another.
So if there is a contempt hearing, and I guess we're not sure if there's going to absolutely be one, but if there is, it's going to be after the defense arrest is what we understood today.
Yeah, that's what the judge said. So it's not that he's not going to have the hearing. He may not, but he said, he wants to defer it till later, basically to the end of all evidence, which would make some sense, because if he did it now and held her in contempt, I mean, that's a tough look.
That's a tough look. Okay, so right now we just learned that Matt McFarland, who is a reporter in the courtroom, was just able to step out. This is the reason we do this right now, and thank you for joining us all streaming, because this is when court takes its lunch break. And so we are lucky enough to hear from Matt McFarland. We were just, let's go out live to him right now outside of Stamford Superior Court. Matt, thanks for being with us. We were just talking about the issues where the judge seemed a little fed up with the whole issue of Michelle looking at her computer and this sealed custody document.
Absolutely, Kara. So this was brought to the attention of the judge late yesterday afternoon, right when court was getting to break for the end of the day. The prosecutor is saying that they were made aware of a document on Michell Troconis' personal computer. The judge says, we're going to deal with this first thing in the morning. That's what they did before they brought the jury in. State argued that it was, in fact, a portion of what is supposed to be a sealed custody evaluation report. So the question is, how did she sort of get that? That's something that the judge is going to want to look into. But again, he did say he's not going to do a formal contempt hearing today. He says one will be done, but again, at the earliest, it will be once after the defense rests. Now, the state, in sort of laying out their concerns, saying that they actually had seen that Michell Troconis' mother, they say, tapped her on the shoulder yesterday afternoon when she was made aware that the state was going to raise this issue of this sealed, what should be a sealed document, was on her computer in her possession in view of the court camera. The state says this is actually the second time they've had an issue, they're saying, with her mother. They said at another point she allegedly mouthed something to the jurors. When it was the defense's turn, they said that they had spoken to Michell and her family. No computer in the courtroom today. They said there will be no more distractions, saying instead they want to focus on the evidence that's being allowed and what's not allowed and let that go to the jurors. But Judge Kevin Randolph basically said that he's not going to allow what is essentially a pep rally. He said he will not be a court monitor, a hallway monitor either, basically saying no more sort of approval or disapproval from either side. No more disruptions from supporters of Michell Troconis and her family, or folks who might be friends and family of Jennifer Farber-Dulos. He said going forward, there will be no computers in the courtroom other than those belonging to the attorneys. He says if he sees any more disruptions, anyone sort of motioning to jurors or witnesses, he says those people will be removed. And again, we'll have that contempt hearing. He says one will be done, but again, not until after at the earliest after the defense rests.
All right, and Matt, I know you have limited time as they're at a break right now, but I'm just curious because you've been covering this all week. It was a short week. We had a storm, we had a holiday, but of the testimony that you've heard this week, what stands out to you as some of the most important that for the focus of the case?
Well, we'll talk about some of the testimony just today. So they're showing videos of what was Michell Troconis driving back and forth. The state saying Michell Troconis driving back and forth on the afternoon of May 24th. That's the day Jennifer disappeared. That's the day prosecutors alleged that her then boyfriend, Fotis Dulos, drove down to New Canaan and killed his wife. Pointing out the video of, they say, Michell Troconis in a white Jeep Cherokee driving back and forth between 4 Jefferson Crossing, the home that she was living in, and 80 Mountain Road, another one of Fotis Dulos' properties. They say she makes a number of trips. We're seeing multiple home surveillance video, and they're trying to sort of piece this together for the jury. And then they show video from a home ring camera directly across from 4 Jefferson Crossing. And they point out that they see smoke coming from one of the chimneys. Smoke coming from one of the chimneys 3 separate times during the afternoon and early evening hours on May 24th, with then the prosecutors also trying to point out that this was May 24th, Memorial Day weekend, not a time when you would typically be using a fireplace. The judge actually sort of shot that down, wouldn't let them continue that line of questioning. So that's where we are right now. They've started showing the third police interview of Michell Troconis. That was from August of 2019. So they've been going through that right now with Detective John Kimball on the stand. Basically, he started with his testimony saying that they did not believe she was being completely truthful with them. The first 2 interviews they had with her in early June of 2019, and this is her third one now with state police.
Okay, Matt, so this is really, we've been waiting for them to get to the point where they really start to link Michell, because up until this point, it really has been a lot about Fotis Dulos and how he definitely killed Jennifer Farber-Dulos. It seems like we haven't always made, so today you're seeing the connections of where they're really trying to say, what was she doing, driving back and forth? Why are these fires? So it seems like the case is moving a little bit more of drawing her exact involvement in.
That seems the way the state is going today, yes.
All right, thank you so much. Matt McFarland coming to us from outside of court. And of course, we'll join you for Eyewitness News at 4 and 5 tonight as court wraps up. Thank you so much for being with us. And let me just update you, because we're going to talk about what's happened, but this is something just happened in the last hour. What he was saying is, I know that you can't hear Matt, but they started to put some videos on of Michell Troconis driving back and forth between the 2 residences the day that Jennifer Farber-Dulos disappeared, the day we believe that Fotis Dulos likely killed her, according to the state. That she's driving back and forth, making multiple trips. And there's also these fires going where 3 different times there's smoke coming from a fireplace. And why would you be doing that on Memorial Day? Although the judge sort of shut that questioning down of like, why do you need to have a fire? But it was the first instance where they're sort of bringing Michell Troconis specifically in. First time I'm hearing about what was she doing that afternoon that they believe is connected to this.
Right. Okay, so again, I didn't hear what he had to say, but having read the warrant, I know what they're alleging. They're alleging that she went back and forth. So Fotis, at least the Four Group, which was his company at the time, owned a home that wasn't too far away. I believe it was on Mountain Spring.
Yes, those are 2 homes that he,
And he was on, so it's maybe 2-3 miles from his home. So I think what you're telling me is they have video of her going back and forth between the 2 residents, and that's where the theory is post the murder that Fotis Doulos was at least trying to cover up his tracks, so to speak. And I guess the implication was that since she was in a car going back and forth, she must have known. But yet I don't see the proof, but I can see the relevance.
Okay. And that's really what we're waiting for, I guess, is from your perspective, from your analysis on this. And again, we don't know. We don't know if she's guilty. We don't know if she's not guilty. Nobody can guess what the jury is thinking. But you brought up, and every time we've done this show, is you cannot be convicted of conspiracy to commit murder just by being there. You have to have some knowledge. So this is what they're trying to do, is say that she would be more than just in the car having no idea what's going on as he's dropping this stuff in the trash bins in Hartford.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple steps there, right? So I think what they're saying originally is, why would you go back and forth between the 2 properties?
Yep.
And I think what she said, at least in the tapes, is that she was under the impression that they were trying to sell the other property, which is plausible, right, at the time. Believe me, he needed money, right?
Right.
And so ostensibly, she said she was over there to help clean up. Now, keep in mind, that second property is over 11,000 square feet. I mean, that's a huge house. So it's like 4 times the size of my house, maybe your house, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's big.
But if you think about it, a house that big, you could be in a section of that house, and say, for instance, she was trying to clean up in a den somewhere, and he's in a totally different part of the home, maybe the garage, and he can do whatever he's doing to try to cover up his tracks. And would she really know about it? That's one way to look at it, but I'm sure, playing devil's advocate, what you like to do, you would say, how could she not, right?
Well, I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate, and I honestly, I don't want to get into whether she's guilty or not guilty, because our job is just to kind of, I love to hear what you have to say. But I think there is, when you talk to people in the community, they're like, oh, come on, she had to know something. How can, where there's smoke, there's fire, that thought. So that's obviously, but that's, again, as a criminal standard, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So I know you think that the state hasn't done it yet, but I guess what we're all curious about is what more is there to come and what's going to be key in this, because they have a case to put on for 6 weeks. They obviously believe that they can make this case.
Oh, yeah. So there's a couple things that I'd like to comment on what you just said. So beyond a reasonable doubt, I mean, that's an interesting concept in and of itself, right? So if you're acquitted, right, if she were to be acquitted in this case, does that mean she's innocent? No. It just means that the state didn't meet their burden beyond a reasonable doubt that she's guilty of something. So people confuse those two things. You could be guilty of a crime, but yet the state can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's where it gets interesting, because that standard is really tough for the state to overcome. And recently judges have said, in cases I've had, well, they'll say to the jury, you can probably think the defendant is responsible for the crime, but that's not good enough. Think about that. Probably did it, but not good enough to overcome beyond a reasonable doubt. It's an immense standard. Now, if it's taken seriously by the jury, and if they really look at it through the eyes that I just expressed, it's going to be really tough to convict her. However, human nature takes over sometimes, and the people maybe don't pay attention to that instruction, and maybe they feel like some do, where there's smoke, there's fire, and they do attach guilt. So hopefully this jury will follow all the information that's given to them by the judge, and they'll follow all the testimony that's provided and come up with the right conclusion.
So the other thing that happened this week is we found out that the jury is not going to hear from the medical examiner in this case. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
So my understanding on that, Dr. Gill, typically when you have a murder case, someone from the coroner's office, and the chief medical examiner in our state is Dr. Gill, someone would come from that office and testify as to the manner of death and the cause of death, okay? Typically if someone was shot, right, he would testify, or she would testify, whatever doctor shows up, about a gunshot wound, and then they would say the cause of death is homicide. In this case, his findings were, and I think he said that a non-survivable injury and the cause of death was a homicidal violence, right? So Attorney Schoenhorn said, well, how can you do that, right? Because he didn't have a body to examine, he didn't have any photographs to examine, he didn't have any body parts to examine. Typically, the medical examiner almost always exclusively has to examine something so they can offer an opinion. And Schoenhorn was right by saying his opinion is based on hearsay alone, which is what the police had told him. So it was excluded.
And basically the judge also saying that I think we've heard enough about how she died. Like the jury has information. The medical examiner was not the only person or piece of evidence that would matter to say that the state believes that she was murdered and how she was murdered.
Yeah, the judge is 100% right. There's more than enough information to suggest that she was murdered by photostoolos.
Right, and that's the part where you are willing to say, at least your opinion so far, that you think they have proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt that photostoolos murdered Jennifer Farberdoulas.
Absolutely.
Okay, so, and that's part of it. If you haven't watched this analysis before, I always think it's interesting. You say, part of this is photostoolos killed himself, there's no body, the family needs closure, there's a lot of evidence, and this is a trial where the state gets to put on all that evidence, and part of it is just because they need to do that.
Yeah, I think so. We talked about this every week, but I mean, if you look at it through their eyes, they put a lot of time and effort in to try to convict photostoolos. So he killed himself, he took himself out of the equation. And they're kind of clever. By charging Michell Troconis with a conspiracy to commit murder, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Jennifer was murdered. Hence, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Photos was responsible for it. In this way, it satisfies their need and all the people that worked on the case, all law enforcement, and most importantly, I think, the family of Jennifer is finally able, I hate to use that word closure, but they're going to get some closure. Once and for all, it was established that she was killed by Photos and she didn't disappear.
So also the neighbor testified, and there's a neighbor across the street, and the neighbor testified that photostoolos asked about, do you have some surveillance camera and some ring video, and talk about that, because it seems that the photostoolos wanted to make sure there was some surveillance videos seeing his truck there to perhaps prove that, hey, I was at my house.
Right. Well, once again, we're talking about Photos, right?
Right.
But what was Photos' actions? He went across, talked to his neighbor, say, hey, can you give me some footage? Because basically I have to establish an alibi. Not in those words, but that's what he was saying. He also indicated to the neighbor that his attorney instructed him to form some sort of like a list of his movements, and this would be helpful to establish that he didn't leave the house. Now, on the video, I think it's pretty interesting because you got the red Tacoma, which is his employee's car. We've already established, at least we think we've established, that he was driving that car, but right behind it was a black SUV. I think it was a Yukon that was later identified as being a rental vehicle, and I've yet to hear who was in that car. And so it seemed like they were leaving in tandem, and I think the neighbor said that was unusual, right? It was an unusual movement to see two trucks moving in tandem like that. You got to ask yourself who was in the other car.
And that's something that you would like to obviously hear more about in this testimony, so we'll see. But it was back and forth. Now, let's go back to, if you're from this area, maybe you even know, it's we call it affectionately the Yellow Man Car Wash in Avon, the Russell Speeders. It's a well-known car wash. People will drive far to go there. But there's also discussion about the whole washing of the car, and that the phone number used to check in was likely Michelle's phone number. Can you speak to the issue of her maybe being there while he's trying to detail the car?
Sure. So once again, it's all about Photos. Photos is the one they have on tape. Photos is the one that paid in cash. Photos is the one that filled out the form with, I believe it was a false description of the vehicle. He didn't provide a name. He provided Michelle's cell phone. It wasn't Michelle. Michelle, at worst, is in a car, I believe, outside, because they had to transport, obviously had to pick them up once you're dropping the car off, and I think to come back and pick up the truck after they, it was detailed. So if I'm thinking about this, and I have been, I'm like, okay, so what is she guilty of? Just being in a pickup truck when this is dropped off? It's all about Photos. But where did that car go? It went back to his employee, right? And what did he do with it? He changed the seats. And by the way, he never even gets charged in this case. So vis-a-vis Gumieni, right? Look at Gumieni's activity. He says, oh, I didn't authorize them to detail the car. Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but if someone detailed my car, I'd be grateful about it, right? Secondly, when he gets the car back, he changes out the seats. Thirdly, they give him immunity, and he testifies against Michelle. What's Michelle's sin during while all this is happening? She's sitting in a truck. If you look at it, I mean, you're being fair and you're making a table, I think Gumieni is here and Michelle's down here in terms of who should we charge.
Okay, so devil's advocate, why wouldn't they go after him instead of her?
Because he cooperated and he got an immunity. So in other words, he can't be prosecuted.
Okay, so you think right now, from a defense attorney perspective, the fact that Michell Troconis kept saying, I don't know anything, you think that's part of the reason she's sitting where she's sitting?
Most definitely that's why she's sitting there. And it begs the question, if she knew something, why, she would have, I would think by now, at least explain to the authorities, if she knew something, she probably could have got her own immunity deal and said this is what really happened. But why wouldn't she say that if she knew? I mean, she's got a young kid. She's got her, her freedom is at jeopardy here. It would have made sense if she knew something to tell the authorities this is exactly what happened. Much like Gumiani did, he gave them some information, he got immunity, he's never going to be prosecuted for this.
Now, the state would say, unless she knew a lot more, that she knew she might be going to prison for what she knew.
Yeah, but that's the whole concept of immunity, right? So if you say, I want to know truthfully what happened, and I will grant you immunity. In other words, I'm not going to prosecute you, Michelle.
Yep.
Tell me what happened, because we really need to know what happened. All right, even if you're involved, we'll give you immunity. Mm-hmm. She could have had that deal, but she said, I don't know anything. So
that came up, actually. Lawmakers, rather the police officers, said they really didn't think she was being truthful in the interviews, that was their opinion, and that was brought up in court.
Well, that's true. And you got to keep in mind, she gave a couple different interviews, and I think today is the final interview they're going to play. Mm-hmm. So I believe the first couple interviews, the first 2 or 3 were in close proximity to the disappearance of Michelle. I think it was the early, it might have been June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And she comes back in August of that year, and I think she basically cleans up everything that she felt, or they felt she was untruthful about. In other words, coming clean.
Yeah, so at this point in the arc of the trial, it does seem like it's picking up a little bit as far as they have to make these connections in order to put Michell Troconis behind bars. It can't just be that, oh, she's the girlfriend and he killed his wife, is what the state is arguing. So is the trial picking up as far as in your perspective? And we haven't heard from Kent Mawhinney yet. I mean, where do we go from here? Is this sort of the arc of oh, we're coming in for some more connection?
Well, it's funny, when you say arc, I think back to high school English, and they talk about you got to get to that climax, right?
Yeah, right. I think that's what people are waiting for.
Yeah, me too, and I haven't seen it. The only person I can think of that's going to provide it, and we talked about this too, is Kent Mawhinney. Mm-hmm.
So, you've structured a lot of trials before. Do you generally save the best witness for last, or are we waiting for that silver bullet? Are we expecting something that we just, obviously we've talked about this, that Schoenhorn would know because of everything in discovery, but as far as how you present this trial and where we're going from here?
Well, keep in mind, the state's presenting the trial right now, so you have no control over what they do.
Right.
But typically what they'll do is one of two things. Either you want to tell a story logically, sequentially. Mm-hmm. I think that's what they're doing in this case. Sometimes the thought is, why don't we start with our best witnesses, which is right off the bat, the responders, this is what we found, this is what happened, and witness X said it was my client. And that's, there's one of two ways. Either you go in sequence or you start off with a bang. This case, they're going sequentially, but I'm waiting for that other shoe to fall. I just don't see it so far.
So if I will put you on the spot about this. If you're Michell Troconis' defense attorney, how are you feeling?
Good.
You're going into the weekend feeling good?
Actually, great.
Okay. And we haven't heard from Kent Mawhinney yet. We know that that's going to come. Do we have any idea from your perspective about how, if we read the warrants and all that, he's the one who maybe perhaps was digging the shallow grave, and could he have some information on Michelle really knowing what's going on?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered by him. First of all, let's see what he has to say on the stand. Then it's going to be subject to cross-examination, but he does have a lot of explaining to do. How does he explain being at that gun club that he helped found, I think? I don't think he was a member at the time he was there, but apparently he was there with Doulos digging a shallow grave. For what express purpose? What other could it be, for obviously Jennifer, and there was some talk about Mawhinney wanting to kill his own wife. So he's got a lot of questions that he needs to answer.
You also brought up something in our prep that we were talking about, that giving him, because I said, well, why not just give him immunity so he can tell everything? And he said the difference would be that he also has these other cases of a sexual assault case that he would have to stand for. So it gets a little more complicated with immunity.
In his case, yeah, he does have another case that's unrelated to this case that's pending. So, but what we can draw inferences from what happened with his conduct, and we talked about this before, but he made bond originally on the original charge, right? Mm-hmm. He violated the conditions of his bond. He was remanded to jail, and obviously no one wants to be in jail. He's an attorney, it's got to be tough. So he was there for 6-7 months, and then he called up the state, or someone did, his attorney, and gave information. It was good enough for them to say, okay, you can be free again. So whatever he said was good enough for his freedom. And so he's going to have to respond to that, because Schoenhorn obviously is going to zero in on that. And, if you're on the jury, you got to consider, do I really want to believe this person based on the fact that the only reason this information, or one of the primary reasons, is to get out of jail. It's a get out of jail free card. And you really, really got to be critical of anyone that testifies given those circumstances.
So timing-wise, we originally heard about 6 weeks for this, and we're at day 23. Do you think we're about halfway through?
I would hope so, but it seems to be moving with a snail's pace. I mean, this week we had a day off. We had a snowstorm. You had, I guess, the hearings today that kind of derailed it somewhat. Next Monday's a day off. Hopefully, a week from now, hopefully they're going to be close to the finish line, I would hope, for the state. And then it seems like the defense is going to, from what I can tell, Schoenhorn said he's going to call witnesses. He said he has to call people from all around the country, and he wanted a timing on that. We talked about that last week.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any more defined, but I think he's hopeful to put on a defense in the first week of March. So this is a very long trial.
Now, how does that affect jurors?
They're human, right? So it's like, to me, sometimes when I'm watching a jury, I say, geez, I hope they don't feel like I did when I was in high school, when you're starting to lose interest and you're falling asleep. And you look for cues like this. I'm being deadly serious. I look at the jury sometimes and I say, am I asking too many questions in my mind? Are they paying attention? Are they with me? Sometimes they're not. And it's just, it's human nature. They're people. Maybe they didn't sleep well. The day gets old, gets long. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They're tired. So it's like, it's virtually impossible to concentrate for a full day, any juror, and it's day after day, week after week, so it's tough. So there's certain things that will pick up or pique their interest, right? So Winnie for sure.
Yeah.
And I keep going back to him because I can't think of anything else that's really going to be game over for her in terms of the state.
Well, it is interesting as we continue. I think you've answered this, but I'll ask you in an even more clear way. Do you think they're anywhere closer to connecting Michell Troconis to these crimes? I
don't. As we sit here 1 week later, and John Schoenhorn said himself, 99% of this trial, at least the evidence that's been introduced, is against Fotis, right? And he's right. And the other 1% arguably doesn't even touch her. So they got to do a better job if they want to convict her.
What about conviction of not conspiracy to commit murder, but some of the other things, tampering with evidence?
It's always a possibility. And sometimes you got to look at the psychology of a jury. Sometimes that they feel that they have to at least give something to the state. They might say, in this case, look, I don't think she was involved in the murder per se, but it seems like after the fact she might have been involved in at least hindering or tampering as charged, and they might find her guilty in that regard. I think they would be have a better chance of being successful with the lesser charges as opposed to the major charge.
Because of the psychology of the jury?
Yeah.
If they want to convict on something.
Well, yeah, they're people too, though, so they might think to themselves, and there might be enough evidence for that too, okay?
Like, from a legal perspective, what evidence connects to the tampering?
See, that's where it gets tough, because I keep saying her presence alone and acquiescence doesn't suggest guilt. You have to work kind of hard to suggest that she participated, because I haven't seen it, and I don't know where it's going to come in, but there is no definitive tape of her, say, taking a trash bag and dumping it. It doesn't exist. I think at worst she opened the door and her cell phone fell out of the door, or something fell down, and she picked it up. I don't think there's any suggestion anywhere in those tapes that she discarded anything. So that comes back to the big property.
Although there is some evidence, possible DNA evidence on one of the trash bags linking to her.
This is your cell phone, right? I could touch it like that. Guess what? My DNA's on your phone. Does that mean we're in cahoots? No.
So the actual connection, though, even though those are lesser charges, you still need to connect it with the evidence.
Again, yeah.
And would she still, in general, it can always, this is very hypothetical, I know, but in general, then do you still go, someone who doesn't have a previous criminal record, do you go away to prison for those?
Well, that would be up to the judge if she were to be convicted. I think clearly that the state would argue for prison, and clearly the defense would say no. But getting back to the concept, it's called a compromise verdict sometimes. That's what basically people call it. So in other words, the jury will compromise to say, okay, we're not going to convict her of the most serious charge, but we're going to throw a bone to the state. That's probably the wrong terminology, but they'll feel if there's enough information beyond a reasonable doubt to satisfy that, they might find her, guilty on something lesser.
And so we'll have to obviously see how this plays out. But at this point, if we're about halfway through, in your overarching view of this, these next 3 to 4 weeks are going to be really crucial to start connecting the dots.
Yeah, they should have done it by now, if you ask me. So getting back to, you should be working up to that climax, and I don't think we are. I mean, at best, they show in a car.
And obviously, that's also spoken like a true defense attorney, but if we play devil's advocate, what your concern would be as a defense attorney is that jurors hearing everything and this horrible crime happened and a mother was likely murdered. Most people are saying that was proven beyond a reasonable doubt. We have 5 children who don't have parents anymore, and a crime that if you're a human on that jury, you're thinking, I need someone to pay for this.
Yeah, it's photos. If you're asking me, I mean, everything comes back to him. I mean, clearly he killed her. I mean, I can say that confidently. I'm not on the jury, but if I was, I would feel pretty confident about that. But why do we have to drag her into it is the way I look at it as a defense attorney. But if you're going to prove a case against her, I mean, you can bring a case all day long against anybody for anything, but you have to prove it, and I've yet to see it.
Walter Hussey, criminal defense attorney, thank you so much for being with us and offering your analysis as you do every week on Fridays at 1 o'clock. So we'll see how this continues to go. And of course, Eyewitness News will be your source for everything on the Troconis trial. We'll be streaming it live for you always on WFSB Plus, and you can join us on Friday afternoons at 1 o'clock as we take a deeper dive. We'll see you back here for Eyewitness News at 4 with the rest of today's testimony.